If you thought we've gotten nerdy before, hold on to your keyboards and mice because we are going deep into technical specifics for the leading attribution platforms in the series. In this 4-episode series, which is, by the way, the longest series we've had, we're bringing folks who are typically behind the scenes of these technologies, helping customers succeed, and we're bringing them onto the main stage to share their best practices. I'm joined on this episode by James Leedom, who works at Adobe as a customer technical advisor, and he helps Adobe customers with best practices and strategies around a whole bunch of Adobe systems and solutions, one of them being Marketo Measure, formerly known as Visible. So welcome to the show, James.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here. Long-time listener.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you could join. So, James, we're gonna dive right into it here, and I want to kind of like set the stage a little bit with a little bit about you. So, how did you first get into marketing operations as like an industry?
Yeah, I fell into it. I think like a few people do. I graduated from college and a week later had a job as a marketing campaign specialist, and the person who hired me was like, "Hey, it's going to be flexible. So we don't know what you're going to be doing yet." And then they showed me Marketo and it clicked for me. Yeah, I didn't really have a focus in college. I mean, I got a communications degree, so it's not like I was really like chasing anything specific, but it worked out. I mean, you get to use a little bit of the statistic mindset, a little bit of the creative mindset and problem solving. So yeah, worked out well for me, fell into it and just decided, hey, this is going to be my personality now.
So sounds like a lot of other marketing ops professionals then. Yeah. Just kind of like randomly dropped into it and now it's just like who they are. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Now, what are some of the like types of projects that you worked on when you were on the, in-house side? So like before you joined Adobe and then also since you've joined Adobe.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it was just kind of fully, like I would say the first like 6 years of my marketing ops experience was like just doing my best to fully understand like the business scenario in which, Marketo and Marketo Measure work well within an organization. So one example would be that I used to work for PowerSchool. PowerSchool was owned by Vista, and Vista had just acquired Marketo. And then Vista came to us and basically said, hey, you get your choice of a couple different marketing automation, or not marketing automation, marketing attribution, multi-touch attribution platforms. And we chose Measure or Visible at the time. And I implemented that. That was probably, I want to say like 2017, probably 2016, somewhere around that. Tibco also had a very good implementation of Visible at the time. Tibco is also, might still be, I'm not sure, a Vista company. And then, so we presented it essentially, and we had some very standard numbers that we had to report to Vista every quarter and keep them up to date on everything. And Visible just helped us get to those numbers a lot easier. So that was a pretty big implementation. That was a big part of my job. And then, kind of stepped away from Visible for a bit, went to Blue Jeans for a while, and RIP Blue Jeans, they've sunsetted it now. But they didn't have Visible, they did have Marketo. That was one of those things where I went in and there's like 20 people on the marketing team and like 35 admins in the system. I was like, what is going on here? So that was an uphill battle for sure. But then went to Marketo, and I think a lot of the doing Marketo and marketing ops at Marketo felt more important because I felt like we were kind of helping answer questions from the marketing team, like the demand gen and customer marketing team of like, what's the best practice to do this? And we didn't really have anything outlined. I was like, okay, well now we have to think through all the scenarios and like create what the best practice is. So it's, a few big projects there. And then, I think, then I was there for the acquisition from Adobe and left and then rejoined about 2 years ago. And so since then, it's really just been developing like playbooks and making sure that like all of our CSMs are well equipped to answer questions, that they feel comfortable bringing me on a call, and just making sure that we have like high retention numbers. We do have good retention with Marketo, which is nice. But I don't have a number tied to my name. So it's one of those like extra. I always try to say that as like the most blunt thing as I can say to the customer, like, hey, listen, my wallet doesn't change whether you renew or not. I just want you to know that I'm going to give you as like the most honest feedback as I can. And most people seem to appreciate that. So I think, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I think that's something interesting is just that concept that how you build trust with people and letting somebody know that, look, whatever decision you make is not going to affect my compensation. So you should have confidence that I'm trying to do right by you, because I'm not going to win anything regardless of which direction you go. Okay. So James, I want to talk a little bit about the products that you support. So I know that we're not doing like a demo or a sales pitch here, but what I want to do is I want to just kind of set the stage so that anybody that's listening understands, the products that you work on within Adobe. You've already mentioned Marketo and Marketo Measure. Are there any other Adobe products that you generally support?
I would say those two are like the number 1 and 2, like 1A, 1B, and then anything that goes along with Marketo. So like MSI, Sales Insight, that's a big one. People having questions about their licenses that they have, and so that, and then obviously we have other products in the DX space like Target and Adobe Analytics and Commerce, and I know I'm forgetting a bunch more, but I mainly work in Marketo, so that's just, they hired me to be a one-trick pony, and Marketo is my trick. But so a lot of those don't have a direct integration with Marketo, but we have ways to integrate those different products, or like Target, for example, different personalization. You can kind of read those query strings within Marketo and assign people to different campaigns. So there's definitely a lot of customization that you can do and bringing all of those together. But also like Commerce, when Adobe acquired Magento and they acquired Marketo in a pretty similar time frame, the overlap of customers that use both Marketo and Magento is pretty small. So it's more likely we'll have someone using like Workfront, and we use Workfront internally as well for ticket system essentially. But there are a few ways to integrate Workfront, like through Fusion, basically like an API to create program templates or clone a program template based on a Workfront ticket that a marketing ops team gets. So there's some of those customers, we work directly with that. And then a lot of the things are like the add-on, like API stuff is a lot of the stuff that APIs are like, I've never been good with APIs. I'm trying to get better with it, but it's also one of those things that's like, we're not going to build that for you, but we can take a look at it and say like, yeah, that failed because of this, this, and this, which is kind of nice because then you're not like building anything from scratch,
Yeah. Now you mentioned DX, just in case any of our listeners aren't familiar with the Adobe acronyms. Right. What does DX stand for?
Yeah, it's our Experience Cloud. So we kind of have like 3 different clouds. One would be creative, how people usually think when I say Adobe. They're like, oh, you work in Photoshop. Like, no, I don't know. Up from down in Photoshop, but yeah, so the Creative Cloud has like, the Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, things like that. And then our Document Cloud, we have Adobe Sign, we have PDF, Acrobat, a lot of things that people are familiar with. And then DX being the Experience Cloud. I kind of phrase it as more of our B2B side. So while some of those products can be B2C or B2B2C, we are mostly going B2B when we sell within the Experience Cloud DX.
Okay. Got it. Thank you for adding that context.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about Marketo Measure specifically. When you see a Marketo Measure instance that's set up in a really, really, really damn good way, what are some of the common things that you see in a really, really good Marketo Measure setup?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say the first thing that pops out is that they don't have like other as a channel or sub-channel that is taking up, like it's going to be there. That's fine. I think the mentality I've always adopted within marketing ops is like, if we're 95, 97% of the way there, I'm pretty happy with that. if we send you 97 or 95 leads and 3 to 5 of them are junk, it's like, yeah, oh, well, 95 to 97% were great. So I think like if there's other, and it's like a pretty big percentage of your attribution, that's just one of those things where it's just like, spend a little bit of time in your online channels and your offline channels. Do a buyer touchpoint report within your CRM. Look at where those touchpoints are coming from. Maybe a query string got screwed up, or recategorize some of those things on your online touchpoints, because you want it to go somewhere. Like other is, it's like like a lead source of other. It's like, come on. like reassign it to legacy, or like if the lead source says like email, it's like, well, how'd you get their email? I don't care if you emailed them, So I think I think that's one thing. Is another thing would be like a good disbursement of channels. I think it's pretty rare that you have a business that is so solely reliant that like 90% of their attribution goes to email or it goes to PPC. I mean, it happens. There's going to be like winners of those channels, but I think having I always think of it as like a garden. Like for my business, AKA my backyard, I want a garden that has these different things, because I'm not solely just pumping out cherry tomatoes for the whole neighborhood. Like I'm growing stuff so that I can eat it. I don't want to just eat cherry tomatoes for my whole meal. So I think, having a good disbursement of those channels and sub channels, and making sure that like you can kind of just tell that it's well thought through, the like amount of channels and sub channels that they have, and like where they're putting money and where the ROI is coming back on those channels. Yeah, I would say those are like my 2 top things that I'm looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I typically like to think of the other channel as like where we do our testing and experimentation within marketing. Like right. If we decide tomorrow, hey, we're gonna try Reddit, and we're gonna try advertising on Reddit. Like, you don't just let that go into other. Like, you can, until you make a decision on whether or not you're going to continue with that long term. If we decide, hey, I want to keep doing Reddit for a long time, it seems like it's working well, then go ahead and make your Reddit channel, do all of your, replumbing of UTMs and all that stuff, and get those other touch points into the Reddit channel. But if you decide like, okay, we ran a 2-month test, we're not going to do Reddit ever again, just leave it in other. Like, that's totally fine. Yeah. Because there's nothing, it's not going to show up much, if at all. Yeah. So it's not hurting anything. So that's kind of how I typically recommend using like the other channel, because to your point, like, you shouldn't have a lot of impact coming from an other channel. Right. It's just, you need to be more descriptive than other. It's just because it's not going to help you at all. So I totally agree. And that's kind of like how I usually guide clients on using the other channel.
I like it. Yeah. I've seen that with the online touch point kind of like disbursement, where let's say you do put Reddit in there and you're running an ad on Reddit. So you would do like paid social and then other for the sub channel, instead of it just going in other total. And that would just be that like, there's the asterisks in the medium. It's usually me. I always get medium source mixed up. Like, I'm bad with usually that, medium. Medium, yeah. So it'd be in the medium, the asterisk, which just means that like there's something there. We just haven't defined it as a channel. It's funny that you say Reddit, because I have seen that when I was internal at a previous company, that I was like, when did we run Reddit ads? And like, what types of Redditors were buying our products? It was just one of those things where it's like, especially when you're in B2B, it's like, what are we doing? Like, who are we, and how do you even like target the right people? Usually, like, I would never give out my Reddit name. Absolutely not. I'm sure you wouldn't either. Like, when it's just, Reddit is like its own little, like, it's like, oasis, but in the same sense, like a bit of a hellhole,
Yeah, exactly.
It's just funny you say Reddit, because I've thought about that before.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to go into this next section. This is a little bit different than what we've done in previous series. In this section, everybody that is a guest during mini-series number 4 here is getting the exact same questions. so that we can essentially like take these and put them into a really nice like how-to resource. So this is almost kind of like a rapid fire kind of thing. So James, what are your UTM best practices? I know you just mentioned that, medium and source gets you confused a little bit, but like, what are your UTM best practices?
I mean, number one, I like an Excel sheet essentially as a generator with another tab with lockdown sources. So you don't type it in, you just select it. That can get a little weird when you're like copying links with the HTTP / and stuff like that. But I think the Excel sheet as basically as your go-to with a PDF of things for people to remember. I like when I have like a bit of I call it like a shit list a bit. Is that okay word to say on here? Yeah, that's fine. We're all adults. Yeah,
totally fine.
Yeah,
you would not be the first one to swear on this podcast, and you won't be the last one. So we're all good.
I do like having a bit of that, a bit of a shit list in whether that's in like a CRM like Salesforce, but the buyer touch points, looking at like let's say email clicks, or that the referrer page was like Facebook or social or something like that, but there was no UTMs. So being able to look at that and be like, okay, we have like 10 touch points today. They're from these different sources or referrers, and there's no UTMs associated to it. So I know, we sent out an email. It was pushing to this definitive guide. Check that email. Marketo has no UTMs. I can make sure to get on the campaign manager about that and just like let them know, if you don't do UTMs, if you just choose not to, like, guess where that attribution goes? Not to your team. So
it goes to other.
Yeah. I mean, and it's the same thing. Like I get asked this fairly often, like, how do you get leads to follow up with sales? Like, how does sales get paid? Leads, like converting leads. Great. There's your answer. Like, do you like money? Do you like, I don't know. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I do agree with the Excel spreadsheet. I will give a quick shout out for very, very large distributed teams that an Excel spreadsheet might not be enough. There's a software out there called UTM.io it's essentially, it's like a software platform that does what an Excel spreadsheet does, but it gives you a lot more guardrails. So if you got large distributed teams building UTMs, then like going from an Excel spreadsheet to a platform like UTM.io is really, really smart thing to do. But yeah, something to give some guardrails.
That's really good to know, because I have seen that Excel spreadsheet like is useful in the like 5-person to 40-person like realm, but then it's like, oh my god, there's all of these, like you're at like line 555 and you're like, okay, well I'll hide all these and now we're back up. So that's great to have. That's a good idea. Does that automatically like bit.ly the link as well?
No, not if you don't want it to.
Okay.
It just builds UTM trackable links. Yeah. Next one. It's the biggest pain in the ass when it comes to attribution. It is tracking and inputting costs. So how do you recommend marketers track and input costs into a system like Marketo Measure?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to vary business to business, but I do think that there's like an overarching theory that goes for probably 90% of businesses that do that. Number one, you have to pick whether you're going to input hard costs, soft costs, or both. If you're doing headcount, if an email is built, let's say it takes 3 hours to build an email and send it out, that's 3 hours of so-and-so's time. They get paid X number of dollars an hour. There's your soft costs. So your soft costs are like baked in. I personally don't like using soft costs because people get paid different amounts of money. Some people are out. Some people are, it's harder to keep track of. And then your hard costs, and one more thing in there is technology costs as well. But your hard costs are things that you actually pay for. So like PPC or sponsored webinar, sponsored email, or like, we hosted this webinar, but we paid so-and-so. We Venmoed James Leedom $3,500 to be on it, I'm not paid to be here. But, that would be like a hard cost that you bake into that campaign to say, like, was this a worthwhile investment? Obviously, your technology costs, you're paying for Marketo, you're paying for Marketo Measure. That would be more, that's less of your ROI that you're looking at per campaign. That's more of like when finance says, hey, we have to know that this is like the right technology. We're doing this renewal. How much money have we garnered in the marketing space that Marketo helped us close? So I think that's number one, is like choosing and making a hard decision. It's not that there's like a wrong decision to make there. You just have to choose it and define those outlines and then just go with it. And maybe next year, take a look at it and be like, does this work for us? Kind of revisit it. That would be number one. Number two is like just making sure you have a cost center. We were doing some integration with, and I forget which platform it was, where all of these like POs would come in. When I was at Marketo, shout out Molly Diaz. She was killing it. She was our procurement manager there. And so she was looking at all the different POs that were coming in for all these different campaigns we're running. And then Matt, like setting up the infrastructure to match those to campaigns that we had in Marketo. And then I would make sure that those Salesforce campaigns had the same number associated to them. So it's kind of tough. It is the bane of a lot of people's existence is the cost. But on top of that, I think as going into ROI, is like you really have to think of where in the buyer's journey you're meeting someone. This is kind of like an aside, but it's a little bit of my like a soapbox that I get on. Like, events are very expensive, but you have such and in Marketo Measure, events are measured as the same as like a PPC click, which it's a big complaint. I get it. I agree with it that there's really not like a weighting to that. But I mean, I guarantee that the customers that I've met in person and been able to talk to about all these like a different add-on, or maybe they're thinking about buying more MSI seats and things like that, that has such a bigger impact than like a PPC click. And it's more expensive, but it might just garner the same amount of money. So I think there's so many things to consider. You just have to make a decision, and you have to like write out the caveats so that when you get that question, you're able to produce like a more consistent answer.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on the soft cost piece in particular, because it's so difficult, particularly if you're talking about like salaries and hours. You would need to set up essentially a project management system that is the same level as like a consultancy, where you're tracking at the hours level, because otherwise, how are you going to estimate how many hours somebody spent on an email, right? Like,
yep.
Hey, James, do you remember that email we sent 3 weeks ago? How much time did you spend on it?
Right.
I don't know. An hour and a half? Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Oh, wait, but then there was one the week after that. How much time did you spend on that one? I don't know. An hour and a half? Like, it's probably the same. So it's just, it's a nightmare to have to try to do that if you don't have a project management system that's tracking that for you. And most orgs do not want to build a project management system that tracks things at the hourly level. They just don't, because it's a lot of infrastructure. It really is. And it's a lot of just manual work for the people that are running these campaigns, going in and saying, okay, well, today I spent 15 minutes on this thing, and we log 15 minutes and then move on to the next thing. Like, it's just a lot of overhead. Yeah, it is. It really is.
And that is one note too, if I can put a little plug. If you have Measure, and if you have like email as a channel, and then like Nurture, maybe Batch or Marketo, and then Sponsored, put Sponsored as your channel and Webinar and email as your sub channels for that. I know it sounds a little confusing, but when you're looking at channel ROI, that email and the webinar, since organic emails are organic webinars don't have any costs associated with them typically, their ROI is going to be through the roof. And we're looking at that in a dashboard. It's such a pain to be like, email ROI has like 580x. Yes, but that's because we have all these natural or organic emails and then sponsored emails. So figure out a better way to do that so that your ROI doesn't get blown up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, next one. Marketo Measure relies on Salesforce campaign data, campaign types, campaign member statuses. So what are your Salesforce campaign best practices for Marketo Measure?
I mean, I think it's just like locking those fields down. So I don't think a description is necessarily like handy. I mean, that's why you have a campaign naming convention. It's this campaign in this quarter. This is the channel, whatever. But start date, end date, cost. Throw a dollar in there until the campaign's done. You know exactly what it is, but you have to put those start and end dates in. Anytime that you edit it, it has to have that information. So yeah, I think it's just part of like the setup process. Create the campaign in Marketo, clone it from your program template, sync it to Salesforce, go in Salesforce and make sure it has all the right program member statuses, things like that, start date, end date. Yeah, as Marketo Measure pulls that in, it's going week by week on that start date, end date. So yeah, I think that would be the standard one, just and just like ensuring that all the campaign types are set up correctly. I mean, successes, like that's kind of more back into like the rudimentary piece of just like campaigns in general. Like I don't like having webinar registrations as a success, but no shows and attendees could be successes. One big thing is because that doubles up on an engagement. If someone fills out a form to register for a webinar, but then they're put in the webinars as a registered and it's a success. Now you have 2 touch points that are getting essentially the same engagement. So yeah, I guess that would be like the second piece of that is just making sure you're not doubling up on things like email and webinar registration.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is, to me, the single most important thing when it comes to campaigns is there's no right or wrong structure to campaign types and campaign member statuses. You can kind of do whatever you want there, but consistency. The consistency is like I don't care if you call it attended or attend or attending.
Yeah, right,
like,
right.
It doesn't matter. Just do it the same way every time, because it's a logic-based rule on the Marketo Measure side that says if campaign type equals X and campaign member status equals A, B, or C, then create a touch point. But if you introduce campaign member status, D, E, F, G, H, I, Measure's not going to know what to do with those. So just consistency.
Yep. And that's always like the bone that I end up picking with people, in the marketing team. They're like, well, why don't we do it like this? Yeah, we can. I mean, there's like 100 different ways to do anything, but we've decided to do it this way. So we're just going to do that. There's no difference. It's not like we're changing something like, monumental. It's just like little things. Yeah. I'm a stubborn guy. So it'll take a lot for me to like change my mind on something. I try to keep an open mind. That's definitely like my biggest like marketing ops downfall is being stubborn. But those little things like you're talking about is like, well, why is it attend instead of attended? I don't know, because it's always been that way. Like, why do you care? like, and they're all attend.
And if there's no material difference,
right,
then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's present tense or past tense.
Yeah.
If we just use it the same way every time. So like there's things that matter and there's things that don't matter. And I think that I don't think there's anything wrong with being stubborn, particularly in marketing ops, because I am really stubborn when it comes to certain things.
Yeah.
And so, but I think you have to be, because that stubbornness creates that consistency and what I like to refer to as operational rigor. When you've got that operational rigor, these things work really well. When you don't have that operational rigor, these things fall down, and you have to be a little bit stubborn and say, no, we're not going to change this, because it doesn't matter if it's past tense or present tense. It doesn't mean it didn't mean anything. So we're not going to change it.
I totally agree with that. Operational excellence. It's like, you have to put your foot down on those.
Absolutely. All right, next question. How should marketers be thinking about reporting on ROI on things like brand or hard to measure channels like podcasts? Like, how should organizations be thinking about reporting on ROI for those?
And it's like the dark social question, like it's a good question. I don't have like a key secret answer to that. I think also because I haven't been, last 2 years, I haven't been in the seat of marketing ops where someone's like spending money on a team sponsorship or something like that. And it's like, it's really hard. And especially, I mean, Adobe's probably one of like the largest companies in the world when it comes to like brand recognition as well. And I think that it gets built over time. I mean, I'll tell you how not to do it is to put an open field, text box field on your form that says, how did you hear about us? don't do it. Don't do that. Or don't even do the drop down. Because I'll tell you what, no one cares, and no one's going to report on that, and no one's going to look back and be like, "Oh, we actually had 16 people come from our Tour de France team that we sponsored. Contact us." It's like, that's not going to happen. So I think it's tough. I mean, I think that like this used to be the biggest thing with like direct mail as well. I'm sure you remember. You send someone a gift package essentially, and it's like, was it delivered? Yes. Is that person in the funnel? Yes. Were they before? Also, yes. Do we know, like, if this had an impact? Not really. I mean, I think so much of it's digital now, especially with, like, the advertising space. It's only going to get better. But I think just for now, like, tracking it, making sure that you have tabs on it and how much you're spending and how much you're spending in relation to other channels where you know what those conversion metrics are. But yeah, I mean, again, my wallet doesn't change whether you do one thing or another. So I think I'll give you the no BS answer. I don't really know exactly how to track that. I appreciate it from afar.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's really tough. Like you mentioned like sponsoring a sports team or sponsoring like a Tour de France team or something like that. Like those are so difficult to measure in any way, shape, or form. And that's where I think like, where I think in my opinion, in my experience, one of the things that you can look at is because where brand marketing usually shows up, at least in terms of Marketo Measure touch points and multi-touch attribution touch points, is it usually shows up in the direct channel and the organic search channel. Because ultimately that's what brand is designed to do. It's designed to get people to learn your brand name and what you do and what you stand for so that when the need arises, they know, hey, I remember that Attribution company. And they go type in Attribution and maybe they type in the website directly, or maybe they do a Google search and click on an organic search ad, but it's usually going to show up in direct and organic search. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to try to find a way to figure out like, hey, did direct and organic search go up during the time period where we had this sports partnership, or like during the Tour de France and for the 3 months afterwards when we would expect to see that lift, did direct or organic search go up? Cool. Did we have anything else that might cause that increase, or was it just this Tour de France team that we sponsored? No, it was just the Tour de France team that we sponsored. Everything else was like normal operating. Yeah. So if there's an increase there, like, okay, it's probably the Tour de France team. Like that just makes sense.
A loose correlation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think, and on top of that, like that's a really good point. You want to have your controls and your tests kind of with anything that you're doing. If you spend a few $1 million on a Tour de France team and Tour de France is coming up, don't change your SEO strategy. Don't make a bunch of changes. Don't roll out a new website right before that happens. You have to keep those things in control where you're like, okay, we're level or like steadily growing, and then we have this spike. That totally makes sense. That's a great point. That's tough though.
It's tough. It's really tough. It is. Yeah. I mean, the best way to measure that kind of stuff is using like media mix modeling. Right. But like even then that's tough because it's still just you're using statistical correlation and regression analytics to get there, but it's pretty scientifically sound and statistically sound, sure. But it's still like, you can't point to a data point that says, we sponsored Tour de France and it caused these 45 leads to be created that we didn't have before. Like, it's not there.
And in that creative space too, you're like, I spent $50,000 last month and I made people, I think I made people feel this certain way that they had an impression with this ad. And I mean, that's because it's a necessary thing to have brand awareness, but it's also the first thing when budget cuts come around where it's like, can you prove something? Like, well, no, we've never been able to prove 100% like you just said. And that's not changing anytime soon. So yeah, that's hard.
All right. Next question. One of the most common issues in attribution is the data, the underlying data that, the attribution is built off of. So do companies need perfect data before they start considering Marketo Measure?
As someone who's focused on retention, yes. No, I'm just kidding. No, you don't. I think that one of the biggest kind of themes that's, as we've talked about, because I'll get questions from like Marketo customers. They're like, hey, we're looking at Marketo Measure. We're looking at maybe building our own homegrown system to develop like a multi-touch attribution. And, either of those could be right for the business. Again, my wallet doesn't change. I'm just like, I'm here to answer your questions. And I think that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think it's best personally to work backwards though. So if you can show me, the last like 2 years of close won opportunities, and they have accurate dates and they have accurate stage changes, and their average contract value is like in line with what the business expects it to be, which obviously if you're reporting to a board, you should have that information anyway, but you need, to like get into a multi-touch attribution system and figure out what's working in the top of your funnel and do ROI. You need the R, and you need that like consistently updated, and you need sales reps working out of that CRM essentially, whatever it may be. Because if you just have opportunities open and they never close, and then like 2 years later someone's like, oh yeah, I gave them a call and they're still interested. It's like, you have to have rigor the same way that like marketing ops does. So I think that in terms of like what needs to be really good, perfect is progress is the enemy, or perfect's the enemy of progress, right? So what has to be really good is like your opportunity structure and how you see those dollar amounts coming into the business. Marketing isn't effective if sales isn't like in line with that. So yeah, I think your marketing stuff can be a mess, and you can pretty effectively do that, because it also is a bit of a catalyst to like clean that up, because you get in there and you're like, what is going on? We have like, we did $55 million last quarter. Like, we don't know what is like, okay, well, naming conventions, like UTM conventions, matching those up online and offline channels. It's such a catalyst for change.
I love that point about it being a catalyst for change, because I've seen that as well, where you get Marketo Measure in there and then it exposes the data challenges, but then it acts as like that carrot at the end of the stick that's like, hey, look what we could be doing if we fixed these issues. Like, we've got these capabilities now, and if we just fix these issues, look how cool this is going to be in 6 months or a year or whatever the time frame is. So I love your point about it being a catalyst, because I've seen that myself quite a bit.
It's like a flag system. I mean, you were talking about the other channel earlier, where it's like that shouldn't be a big impact. But if that, let's say even $7-8 million of attribution goes to your other channel when you did 55 million in a quarter, that's a pretty big, that means something worked in the other channel. And now it like warrants continuing to like test it and improve on it and categorize it. And then that's a great thing about Marketo Measure is you can backfill things. So like, yeah, like you, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but if you make a decision and you say paid search, and our source is just other, you go back and 6 months ago you had your Reddit channel engagements come in, or sub channel engagements essentially. You can change that and it will go back and fix that for you, which is so nice. Like nothing you do is like permanent.
Exactly. And just for our listeners, in case you're not sure what James is talking about here. So we all know the struggle in, like, for example, Google Analytics. When you make a change to something in Google Analytics, it's forward facing only. Well, Marketo Measure was built to not make that same mistake. And so when you make a change to the configuration of Marketo Measure, it actually reprocesses all of the historical data against that new change. So to James' point, nothing is permanent. Everything is written in pencil. It can be erased. It can be fixed. There's no mistake that you can make in Marketo Measure related to the configuration that like is not fixable. So it's one of my favorite features about the platform.
Yeah. And you'll find a mistake.
Oh, absolutely.
A mistake will happen. And maybe there is something that you can't undo. But yeah, most of it you can't undo. So
yeah. All right. How big of a team is needed to manage Marketo Measure?
Ooh, how good is the team? No, I think, and do they have Attribution? I think it should be at least half of one person's full-time job. I think that like, it really depends on the level, like how much you're investing into your marketing team. You know, I think marketing apps should be a tenth of how many people you have on your marketing team. So if you have 40 people on the marketing team, 4 marketing ops people. Half of one of those person's job, at least, maybe 3/4 or full, would be really ideal, because that is the essence of that is the fruit that your CEO, your CFO, your CRO, your CMO looks at to say, like, is this marketing team being effective? So it's really important to put a lot of work into it. And if you don't have the headcount to do that, then I do highly suggest that you have someone like Attribution. Maybe the right people for you, maybe not. I don't know. But they want to see you succeed, just like I want to see you succeed. So it's just like getting it right from the get-go and being able to have the answers to the questions that inevitably come up. When does a webinar go from a channel to a piece of content? That's always like the theoretical big question. No, there's bigger questions than that. That's just one that pops up all the time. But yeah, I think having one person dedicated to it is great, especially as it relates to, like, you know, if you have that one person also working very closely with rev ops, sales ops, whoever it may be on your CRM side, they're able to like knock things out really quickly. Like, oh, I need this field with a workflow that like populates it on the contact because we can't read it from the account. Great. Get that done. Change the segment and Marketo Measure. Boom, you're working. So yeah, that would be my answer. What do you think? I'm curious, because I feel like you're much more like, you work with a lot more Marketo Measure customers, or maybe similar amount.
Yeah, I mean, I think your estimate's probably pretty right there. I think it depends on. I think it probably depends on the size and complexity of the marketing department itself, that you might eventually get to a certain scale where you need somebody that's their full-time job is Measure. Because to your point, there's optimizations that are going to need to happen inside CRM that are because of Measure. There's optimizations that are going to happen in marketing automation that are because of Measure. There's reports that need to be built. There's data that needs to be QA'd and monitored. Like you talked earlier about your shit lists, like I call it fail reports. And somebody has to be monitoring the shit lists or the fail reports on a weekly, monthly basis to make sure that the data is right and that we don't have data going into the other channel that should be going into the paid social.reddit channel, right? Like somebody has to be steering the car. The car's not always in motion. Yeah. But somebody's got to, when it is in motion, somebody's got to be steering it. And the larger and more complex the organization, the more that car needs to be in motion and needs to have somebody piloting that vehicle. So I think that for most orgs, half of a full-time job is probably pretty accurate. Smaller orgs, you could probably get down to a quarter. I probably wouldn't go less than a quarter. Because at that point in time, you probably don't have the complexity required to need multi-touch, right? So, it's probably not going to go lower than a quarter, but it could get as high as, a full-time person that manages Marketo Measure. I don't think you need a team of 5 people managing Marketo Measure. Like that's overkill. So anybody that thinks like, any of our listeners that think like, oh, I'm going to need to hire a whole team of people to manage this tool, just like I did for Marketo. No, you need maybe most orgs. I think half a person, half a full-time role is probably pretty dead on.
I think half a full-time role if they've done it before. I think more than that if it's new to them. That also doesn't include like our Marketo Measure like add-on with data warehouse. If you're pumping tables in through Snowflake or Alteryx into Power BI, let's say, or another data visualization tool, you need like a statistician essentially, to like a data scientist to be pulling that information. In terms of configuration within the Discover dashboards, like really to like fully understand it and explain, that's the big part of it is explaining it to other people. That is like the biggest part of the job that I found. Even when I was at Marketo, it was like, yes, we own this tool. We're selling it. We're actively running campaigns to sell this tool, and then explaining it to those people running those campaigns. It's like it's a complex tool, and I mean, attribution's complex. It really, I feel like I had to fail 2 implementations before I really understood it, and was like, oh yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. I understand why that would do this and why you would not want to do that, essentially. So
yeah. It's the one thing that I think that goes into that role of the person that's managing this that I think is a little bit underrepresented, or folks kind of underestimate the importance of it, is you need somebody in your organization that when we're running a campaign, whether it's the same type of stuff that we've done previously, or if it's got some new tactics or elements in it, somebody's got to be the person that raises their hand and says, hold on, we need to make sure Visible's tracking this, or Measure is tracking this. If Marketo Measure is not aware of this tactic through our configuration, then we have to build a tracking strategy to make sure the Measure is tracking it. That's not difficult to do, but somebody's got to be the person that raises their hand and says, hold on, got to make sure we're tracking this. And that's the person that manages the system, because they're the ones that would know, how are we tracking this? Is this an online channel? Is it going through Salesforce campaigns? Is it going through Salesforce activities? Wait, this is something new we've never tried before. We got to like think through this. Like, you know, somebody's got to be there to do that.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And in the same vein, like opportunity stages, that sales ops likes to make changes and not tell marketing ops. And I'm saying that, and I know it's not all sales ops where that does that, but I've seen that happen quite a few times in the past. And then it's like, oh, we don't have any like stage changes for stage 1 discovery. Oh, well, we removed the colon from it, so now it's just stage 1 dash discovery. Like, okay, that's good to know, because I need to know that. Or like, we changed the website configuration. Now we don't have dash resources dash anymore in our query strings. It's like, great. When were you going to tell me? Like, and yeah, you do have to have your like greasy little hands in every like part of how someone might interact with your business. Down funnel, top of funnel. It's not easy, but it's pretty rewarding when you get to like catch those things though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a lot easier than people think though, because like if sales ops makes changes to stage names, like, yes, we have to go change that in Marketo Measure, but it's not difficult work. I mean, it's going to take you 15 minutes of hands-on keyboard effort to go make those changes in Measure and reprocess the data. So like, it's not a large amount of effort. It requires somebody that knows the tool very, very well, but it's not a large amount of effort.
Yeah. And I'll pull that back a little bit, that it's not, to any marketing house people who don't have multi-touch attribution right now, it's no harder than your job right now. It's just that it comes with a different set of complexities that like you can draw similarities to Marketo Engage as a product, as a product to Marketo Measure, and like the complexities that come with that, the challenges, but a lot of it honestly is people challenges. So you're kind of just like building relationships with like teams, and just making sure that they trust you and you trust them to like let you know about those things. So it's not harder than what you're doing right now. It's a different set of challenges.
Agreed. All right, James, I got one more question for you. This one's completely off topic of Marketo Measure and attribution. This is just letting people get to know James a little bit. which is actually really fitting because you've got guitars in the background. I pretty much have music going on in my house all the time.
Yeah.
So, like, what music are you listening to right now? Artists, bands, genres? Like, what are you listening to?
Yeah. I would say I have a pretty like I don't really have one genre that I listen to, but right now I've been listening to a lot of like Evan Honer. I just saw him in Boulder. I'm in Denver, Colorado. You know that, Drew. But I just saw him in Boulder. He was great. I've been listening to him for the past couple of years. So it was one of those experiences that was like, oh, I know every single song this guy's singing. Really like it. Outside of that, I've just been there's a few shops around here, like copy shops that'll sell records that are just like I picked up a new Styx record, and I have a good record player and sound system and everything. I'll just play the vinyl because I think there is some like quite a bit of artistic value to the songs in order. Is it annoying to get up and change and flip the vinyl? Yeah. Do I do it reluctantly? Yeah, totally. Could I just hook up my Spotify and pump it through the same thing in order and have the same sound quality? Yeah. But there's just something good, man, to that, like a nice neat whiskey. I know you're a whiskey fan as well, so I'm sure you can appreciate that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, James, I want to close this out with just some key takeaways and key learnings from our conversation. So I think one of the things that came up that I think is a key learning that I think our listeners should pay attention to is looking at that other channel and making sure that other channel doesn't get over-indexed for in your attribution platform. Because if it does, I mean, you're going to really struggle to garner insights from other. So super important to keep an eye on that other channel. Another one that goes hand in hand with that is having shit lists, or what I call fail reports, that you can keep an eye on that help you avoid things like other getting over indexed for. Because the more that you keep an eye on those things proactively, the fewer instances you're going to have of like, oh, we're doing the big quarterly report for the board, and oh shit, 75% of our attributions going into the other channel. We can't share that with the board. Like, we can't do that. What do we do? The meeting's on Monday. Like, you've got to keep an eye on these things proactively. So having your shit lists or fail reports, super important. Another thing that you mentioned that I think is really important for people to take away from this is that you do not have to have perfect data before getting on a multi-touch attribution platform like Measure. Because a lot of times, and this is the important part, Measure will be the catalyst to see what's wrong in the data and to have that kind of incentive to clean it up. So you don't need perfect data because you now have a catalyst in here. Another thing that you mentioned that I think was really, really good was about ROI on things like brand or typically hard to measure channels. Sometimes it's really difficult to do. And we have to understand as marketers that sometimes we're not going to be able to track certain things. And that's okay. As long as we know going into it, hey, this is a brand campaign, and therefore this is the way that we're going to measure it, which is not going to be through direct attribution. So as long as we are aware of the things that we're capable of measuring through direct attribution and the things that require some other measurement processes, if we know those things up front, it makes it a lot easier to communicate those things and make sure that like nobody's going into something and get blindsided by like, oh, well, we can't track that brand campaign because it doesn't have direct attribution. And then somebody's mad. Well, no, we got to get that up front. Again, being proactive in that. But it's okay to have marketing activities that are not directly attributable to revenue. It's okay. We know that they're there. We just got to know what they are and plan for them.
You have to have that expectation before you start that campaign, for sure. Exactly.
All right. Well, James, always a pleasure. Great talking to you. Great to see you. I know you're going to be in Anaheim. Yeah, you're going to be at Mopsapalooza, so we'll see you at Mopsapalooza. I don't know if this is going to air before or after Mopsapalooza, but either way, I'll see you there. And
chase us down.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, James. Really appreciate it.
See you later, Drew. Thank you.